Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Wednesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 23rd of July. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your very latest weather information from weather.gov or use your NOAA weather radio. Or you can try the weather info line if you haven't in a while, 1-800-472-0391. Find each Weather Service office on Twitter, on Facebook, and on YouTube. And following this broadcast a little bit later in the evening, go to youtube.com and search for AKWX TV. You'll find the full broadcast there on YouTube, the full half hour of Alaska weather, or try it from our broadcast partner here at alaskapublic.org. Here's a look at fire danger across the state, and you can see where the rain and the active weather has been and where it has not been. Southeast is doing fine. Some elevated levels or high fire danger kind of growing a little bit there across the eastern part of the Alaska Range and northward toward Northway and almost the Yukon Valley. Some sections there around Glen Allen and the Copper River Basin, also across the northern Kenai Peninsula. With that, the western areas are looking a little bit more unsettled with high pressure sitting across the central and northern sections of the Bering. You can see the active flow coming in from the west and northwest as a long wave trough of low pressure sits right across Alaska and guides more active weather patterns and certainly some colder air in across the Chukchi Seacoast, the Seward Peninsula, and points into the YK Delta. Across the west and south, the tropical moisture has been shut off for now. You'll notice that has not taken any surge in from the west or southwest at this point. So those normal surges that we normally see a little bit later in the summer have not really arrived just yet. Look at the visible satellite picture across southeast. You can see clouds have been approaching a little bit more from the west, but they're not really surging in right now across the inner waterways. We've got a frontal boundary located across the eastern Gulf connected to low pressure sitting across the western Gulf. Now, this is also supported in the upper levels all the way into the jet stream level, and so this isn't really going to move a whole lot at this point, just kind of sitting and spinning, but it is slowly transitioning eastward, not really moving at any great rate though. Across most of the state, plenty of clouds are seen across the Chukchi Seacoast, the Beaufort Seacoast, all the way toward the YK, Norton Sound, and the Alaska Peninsula. You see a few breaks out around Attu and across some parts of the Gulf, but by and large it was a fairly cloudy day for most of the 49th. As far as wet weather goes, not a whole lot of substantial wet weather in any great fashion. That may change a little bit in the coming days, but places like Cold Bay picked up about a quarter inch of rainfall today. And other areas across the Alaska Range, maybe a spot shower or two, but that was about it. Most areas we're looking at light precipitation, if any. And again, some parts of the Alaska Peninsula were kind of the big winners there as far as precipitation goes. Showers will continue across the YK throughout the rest of the afternoon. Watch for areas of fog. In fact, by mid-afternoon, fog was fairly widespread up the lower and middle Yukon valleys, even into the Kuskokwim Valley, all ahead of a cold front dropping southward through the Bering Strait. That low pressure system still around Kotzebue Sound at 1,002 millibars will continue working its way southward through tonight and into tomorrow. Meanwhile, high pressure across the Beaufort Sea is dropping southward just a little bit. That's going to nudge this frontal boundary south as well. So a few more showers across the interior tomorrow as the frontal boundary works northward toward the northern Gulf Coast and slowly eastward. And you'll see a few more showers develop across north and western sections of southeast, especially along the coast there. But you'll notice there's a wealth of dry air across the Gulf as well. As we go into tonight, look at the widespread opportunity for rainfall. Now, not every single spot under that green shield is going to get wet. Of course, so we draw a very general weather pattern for Alaska at this scale. So there will be some areas of showers across the northern parts of southeast from Sitka all the way down toward Haines and Ketchikan, generally west there. As you get into the interior, a much better chance for accumulating or look for widespread areas of rainfall from Arctic Village, Fort Yukon, toward Fairbanks and westward toward McGrath. It becomes a little more showery west of the Alaska Range. But the thing you should take away from this is cold air is dropping southward and meeting up with some wetter air across the interior, southwest, and the Alaska Peninsula. Right now, it looks like Kodiak Island will stay dry, and a large part of the Kenai Peninsula and south central will be dry, with the exceptions being around Prince William Sound and the surrounding coastline. Now, if you haven't seen it by now, I'll point this out. It looks like there's going to be cold enough air around the Brooks Range for snow to fall there, and also north of Point Barrow, where snow showers are forecast out over the open water. As we get into Thursday, there's enough warm air still lingering around the Brooks Range, thankfully, that we'll see rain and snow mix there. So it shouldn't be a heavy accumulating event. If it is, it's going to be very brief in nature. But the colder air is dropping southward. With that moisture at elevation in the Brooks Range, you should expect to see some snow. Across areas along the Alaska Range and south and west into the Kuskokwim Valley, that rainfall will likely be more showery in nature throughout the day. For southeast, expect rain to set in once again all the way from north to south, it looks like, with another wave of low pressure working northward and also sitting across areas just west of Whitehorse and near the Alcan border. Showers will be sparse across Prince William Sound initially and then fill back in during the day on Thursday. There's an opportunity for showers across South Central and into Bristol Bay, also along Kodiak Island, with high pressure moving into the St. Lawrence Island region at 1,021 millibars. By Friday, you'll notice that rain shield is moving eastward more, but it's also dropping southward. Expect to see some rain around South Central, the Matanuska-Susitna Valleys, Glen Allen, and the Copper River Basin, and still around southeast, as low pressure is a little bit more disorganized, but it's still feeding in moisture in from southwest to north and east. High pressure is going to drop a little bit more into the northern Gulf at 1,011 millibars. That could keep some rain around the northern half of the Kodiak Island archipelago. And warmer air is moving off of the eastern sections of Siberia, with high pressure still sitting across pretty close to Kiska at 1,029 millibars. That means, just like yesterday and probably like tomorrow, you'll still be looking at areas of fog across the Bering, with some areas of light rainfall around St. Paul, St. George, and the eastern sections of the Aleutians. Temperature-wise today was fairly mild across southeast, with temps as high as the low to mid-60s. One exception, of course, would be Hyder. It's 73 degrees. Around Annette and Ketchikan, temps made it into the mid-60s, with Yakutat at 55. Mid to upper 50s for the eastern part of Prince William Sound. In the west, slightly milder around Seward. Homer was 61, 63 in Kenai. Anchorage saw temperatures in the mid-60s today. Talkeetna 61. Glen Allen was up to 56 degrees, with Northway and Eagle both in the 60s, though Northway clearly warmer at 69 by late afternoon. 61 in Fairbanks. Tanana was 59 degrees. Fort Yukon was 55, with Arctic Village at 55 degrees. Anaktuvik Pass was 52 degrees. 30s and 40s for the Arctic coast, with Barrow being one of the colder spots, seeing a morning low temperature just above freezing and a daytime high around 37. Kotzebue Sound was in the upper 40s to about 50 degrees as you got closer to Kotzebue itself. 45 there around Shishmaref, with Nome at 47. Norton Sound temperatures were in the 40s and 50s today, much closer to that 50-degree mark for many. About 60 in McGrath, with the YK coast in the upper 40s to about 50 degrees for Hooper Bay. Bethel was 49 degrees at 4 o'clock, so a sign of what that fog was doing to your daytime heating. 60s around Bristol Bay, with Dillingham at 63 and 60 there in King Salmon. Low to mid-50s for the Alaska Peninsula. The Pribilofs in the lower 50s, with Atka and Adak both in the mid-50s, and Shemya was showing 53. Overnight low temperatures will generally drop into the upper 40s to about the lower 50s for most of southwest, south central, and southeastern Alaska. Kodiak around 51. Looks like temps will be colder than 50 degrees as you head out into the central and western Aleutians. St. Paul about 48. 47 for Nunivak Island. Bethel closer to 50 degrees, with Norton Sound temperatures dropping below that 50-degree mark, like Nome at 42. Most of the Brooks Range will drop into the upper 30s and lower 40s tonight. The best chance of snow probably in the west, where temperatures will be cooler, and 35 around Barrow. With high temperatures tomorrow, it looks like we'll see readings a little bit closer to the upper 30s for the Arctic coast. 45 around Kaktovik, with the interior still looking at temps in the upper 50s to lower 60s. In fact, Eagle's looking at 70 once again. But notice that colder air there across the Brooks Range. That may support some rain and snow mixing at elevation once again. 62 in Bethel. Nome's looking at 51. Kodiak 63. Upper 50s and low 60s for the Alaska Peninsula. Low 50s there for the Pribilofs once again. 60s for southeast as clouds start to move back in. And mid to upper 50s around Prince William Sound, with Fairbanks at 61. Flying weather, you'll see decreased visibilities there as you head into southeast tomorrow. Also across the interior, a widespread area of MVFR and IFR conditions are expected across a large part of the Bering Sea and the windward side of the Alaska Peninsula. And in the morning anyway, expect IFR conditions along the lower to middle Yukon Valley. That should open up as you get into the day, and look for more areas of VFR across the western coast during the afternoon than what you'll find in the morning. But in Anaktuvuk and Edigan Pass, do expect IFR conditions through a large part of your Thursday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass will probably reach IFR several points during the daytime, but we'll call MVFR toward IFR as we go through the day. Rainy Pass expected to be instrument flight roll. Windy Pass should at least be MVFR during your Thursday, and conditions probably marginal at best around Isabel and Mentasta Pass. For Tanita Pass, expect MVFR, and as you get into Portage Pass, at least MVFR. Conditions will be changing probably heading into Friday, and Chilkoot and White Pass will likely see some improvement as you get into Thursday afternoon toward VFR. You'll notice there's plenty of cold air across the north and west, anywhere from 2 to 6, even 8,000 foot freezing levels there from Norton Sound northward. A pretty tight packing of colder air. So again, our cold front will be right around in here by tomorrow morning. South and west of that, plenty of warm air remains, but this is certainly one of the first surges of colder air we've seen in a while. Tomorrow's icing potential will drop as low as 7 to 8,000 feet and probably be as high as 14 to 15,000 feet. The best chance will be generally east of that upper level trough. Anywhere from light to isolated moderate icing should be expected along that boundary. The jet stream shows our weather pattern and what's driving it to the long wave trough moving across Alaska, running into high pressure on either side across the Bering Sea and across the northwestern territories. That northwesterly flow is dropping in the cold air at the surface and will be maintained, it looks like, for the coming days as the pattern is pretty much stuck in place and supported at 9,000 feet. You see our northwesterly flow, 25 to 35 knots there coming in from the north and west, with another area of low pressure also supporting that very slow moving disturbance across the northern Gulf. Wind speeds on the eastern side coming in from the south and southwest around 10 knots, also across the eastern interior from 20 to 30 knots, and high pressure keeping winds pretty light across the central and western chain. Wind speeds there only 10 to 20 knots. Across the western Bering, 15 to 25 knot winds there, generally west of the Pribilofs. Wind speeds are a little bit faster there as they approach the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern chain. Low pressure across the northern Gulf at 15 to 25 knots, drawing in that colder air across Norton Sound. Winds are light right now coming in from the north across the Arctic coast and Barrow at 10 knots or so, and winds pick up a little bit more coming into the eastern Gulf, running between 15, 20, and even 30 knots there, approaching places like Sitka with a little bit of a faster flow. And light winds across south central at 3,000 feet generally from the east tomorrow around 10 knots. Here's a look at turbulence potential then. We don't see a whole lot just yet, but there probably will be some isolated areas of chop, especially along gaps and passes there around 3,000 feet and below, generally on the lee side of the Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutians below 3,000 feet. And also south of the Seward Peninsula and some of the higher terrain there, generally below 5,000 feet. Watch for some light to isolated moderate. Most of the rest of Alaska should not see any widespread areas of turbulence tomorrow. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with a look at the ice edge and, of course, your marine weather here in just a few minutes.
Convective activity is popping up, or maybe there's ice in the clouds, or low ceilings. Can you get through it safely, or should you be on the ground waiting out the weather? As an instrument-rated pilot, these are questions you've got to be able to answer. Here at Dulles International Tower in the Radar Approach Control Facility, or RAPCON, there's some weather moving in right now, and that could make things interesting for our debonair crew.
1826, Patrick.
How do you find out weather in the vicinity of the airport before you fly into it? You listen to ATIS, right? Well, you can also monitor approach control for a wider look at the local weather in marginal conditions.
Dulles Approach, this is US Air 1117, with you descending out of 7,000.
Roger, US Air 1117.
Listen to what's happening with incoming traffic. If they're being cleared for visual approaches, there's halfway decent visibility around the airport. But there could be wind challenges associated with thunderstorms or frontal activity.
US Air 1117, expect ILS runway 1 right approach.
US Air 1117, roger.
Dulles clearance delivery, Debonair 1588 Sierra with Oscar, instruments to Bradford, Pennsylvania.
1588 Sierra cleared to Bradford via the Capital 4 departure, Martinsburg as filed, squawk code 4645.
Roger, 1588 Sierra, the Capital 4 departure to Martinsburg as filed, and 4645 on the transponder.
88 Sierra, readback is correct. Contact ground point Niner when ready to taxi.
Roger, 88 Sierra. 1588 Sierra, taxi to runway 1 left via taxiway Zulu 1 and Zulu, hold short of Alpha. 88 Sierra to runway 1 left via Zulu.
If you can deal with two frequencies at once, listening to departure control while taxiing can give you important information. Airliners do their utmost to avoid turbulence on departure, and if they're deviating, you should consider doing the same. If departure control isn't too busy, you can ask for information right after takeoff.
Dulles Tower, 1588 Sierra, at number 1 for departure at runway 1 left.
88 Sierra, runway 1 left, cleared for takeoff. Sierra, contact departure.
Over to departure, 88 Sierra. Dulles, departure, 1588 Sierra, climbing through 1,100 for 4,000.
1588 Sierra, radar contact, altimeter 2996.
This is the Dulles RAPCON radar room. If you're under departure control, you're being monitored in a facility like this. The screens the controllers are looking at are called Plan View Displays, or PVDs. They show the returns from a radar installation on or near the approach control's associated airport. PVDs are the controller's eyes. Most approach facilities have ASR-9 radar. ASR stands for Airport Surveillance Radar. ASR is designed for short-range coverage around an airport. Its primary purpose is tracking aircraft, but it can detect some precipitation too. And that can be a big help on days like today.
88 Sierra, climb and maintain 8,000.
88 Sierra, up to 8,000.
Every radar blip has an N number, a computer code number, an altitude, and a ground speed based on history. On these screens, controllers can see precipitation coming that's going to impact the facility. And based on what they see, they can change standard arrival and departure routes to work around the weather.
Delta 34 Heavy, when able, direct manning, then resume adjacent to arrival.
Ground-based radar has limitations. Among them, radar has a tough time penetrating heavy precipitation. That's because of attenuation, which leads to an incomplete radar return. What's behind the blind spot? Blue skies or tall, dark, and ugly ones? By putting together what a pilot reports seeing with what's displayed on a PVD, pilots and controllers can get a more complete picture.
Approach 88 Sierra with the request.
Go ahead, 88 Sierra.
Yeah, at some point before you hand us off to Washington Center, can you tell us if you're showing any convective activity along our route?
What's the matter? You don't like Center's radar?
Sure, but I like yours even more.
I'll sneak a peek for you before we hand off.
Why does the Debonair crew care whose radar they use? Because not all ATC radar is created equal. ASR-9, as I mentioned, was designed to track airplanes. But approach control's ASR-9, even with its limitations, is better at seeing weather than Center's long-range radar. And it's much more accurate in pinpointing areas of precipitation that may be associated with convective activity. Unlike more limited radar at en route centers, ASR-9 can detect 6 levels of precipitation that correspond with National Weather Service VIP for video integrator and processor levels. The higher the VIP level, the more precipitation and the greater possibility of turbulence associated with precipitation. Controllers can select any 2 levels for simultaneous viewing, so the display can be set optimally for the intensity of the activity. The lower levels are displayed as a light green area and the high levels as a brighter green. You can see the difference it makes in definition of the returns. General aviation pilots should avoid any precip area greater than level 2. Approach controllers can usually advise which levels they're painting, but remember 2 things. A level 2 shower can build to level 3 or greater within minutes. Turbulence is often encountered where no radar return is seen. When discussing radar returns, pilots can also ask the direction of movement and if the precipitation appears to be building or diminishing. The reason our pilots called approach control for a look at what's ahead is because they want as accurate a look at what's happening as possible.
At some point before you hand us off to Washington Center, can you tell us if you're showing any convective activity along our route?
And they won't be able to get that same level of definition from Center's radar. The fact is, there's a lot of information available from ATC. For example, pilot reports. This source can be extremely beneficial simply because a report of visually observed weather from an experienced pilot is going to be more accurate than that received from a radar system. When certain weather conditions exist or are forecast, controllers are required to solicit pilot reports on the weather. Pilot reports are forwarded to the local flight service station for dissemination. PIREPs are also retained near the controller's position, so the information can be given to potentially affected flights. Ask controllers for any PIREPs available for your route of flight. But rest assured, even if you don't ask, controllers will often provide general advisories of weather that could affect specific aircraft.
Baron 479er, there's an area of level 4 weather, 12 o'clock, 10 miles, 4 miles wide, moving east.
479er, can you give us vectors around the area?
479er, suggest heading of 170 degrees.
Turning to a heading of 170 degrees, 479er.
Controllers make traffic management look pretty simple, but it's a real high-wire act. And like any precision performance, flying, for example, it requires practice. All the controllers undergo recurrency training, duplicating situations of heavy traffic identical to what they see and deal with on a day like today.
Debonair 1588 Sierra, I'm showing scattered level 1 returns ahead from your 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock, but no convective activity at this time. Connect Washington Center on 134.15. Have a good flight.
Time now for a look at the current sea ice edge analysis from weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php. And as of now, the northern coast is not open. There's no more shore-fast ice at this point, of course, but there's still a lot of pack ice anywhere from east of Wainwright to west of Kaktovik, and open areas on either end there of the map. If you'd like to see this or the outlook that will be available tomorrow, again, head to weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php or go to weather.gov/Alaska, and on the left-hand side of your screen, look for Ice Desk. Here's a look at the marine forecast now for southeast. Generally light winds along the coast, 10 to 15 knots, with seas ranging from 5 to 6 feet all the way from Yakutat to Craig. Across the inner waterways, 10 to 15 knots, with seas ranging from 2 to 3 feet. So Thursday looks pretty good. As we get into Friday, the winds pick up a little bit more from the east. From Yakutat all the way down towards Sitka, you're looking at 6 to 7 foot seas, 8 foot seas south of Sitka to the Dixon entrance, and more of a south and easterly flow across the central and inner waterways. Around 4 foot seas are expected there. 3 foot seas across the Lynn Canal with a 15-knot wind continuing. Across south central, winds should be light across most of the Prince William Sound area. Inside, looking at a northeasterly wind with 2 foot seas there, so a pretty good day on Thursday. Easterlies outside of Prince William Sound with seas up to 4 feet. More of a northeasterly flow outside of Resurrection Bay and east of the Barrens. You're looking at 10-knot winds with a 3 foot sea. Northwesterlies coming off Kodiak Island at 20 knots with a 6 foot sea, and inside Shelikof Strait, a 15-knot wind with a 4 foot sea. Otherwise, southerlies coming up the Cook Inlet with 10 to 15 knot winds with a 3 to 5 foot sea developing, and 5 foot seas expected north and east of Kenai at 20 knots with a southwesterly flow. Winds will let up a little bit more as we get into Friday with a variable flow, otherwise 10 knots all the way through Cook Inlet and into Shelikof Strait. Still looking at a northeasterly wind east of the Barrens at 20 knots with a 3 foot sea, and variable winds inside Prince William Sound with winds outside of Prince William Sound on the northern Gulf looking at easterlies at 15 knots with a 5 foot sea. Across the Alaska Peninsula on Thursday, a general westerly wind around 20 knots with a 7 to 8 foot sea. Winds could be as high as 25 knots by the afternoon, and the Pacific side, a 25-knot flow with a 7 foot sea expected there by Thursday afternoon. More of a northwesterly shift taking place on Friday with a 6 to 7 foot sea there. Winds from 20 to 25 knots, and 25-knot winds continue in the Pacific with that northwesterly flow and a 6 foot sea. For the Aleutians, a southwesterly wind between Kiska and Attu with a 5-foot sea there at 20 knots. Otherwise, a west and northwesterly flow, 15 to 25 knots on the Bering side with 4 to 7 foot seas, and 5 to 6 foot seas across the Pacific side, 15 to 20 knots there on Thursday. Becoming more variable around Kiska and westward, still holding under that southerly flow at 15 knots. Otherwise, a variable flow north of Adak and Eka. Northwesterly winds from Nikolsky to Unalaska and southward into the Pacific at 15 to 25 knots, and more of a southerly flow there developing from Adak to Atka, all thanks to high pressure sitting very close to the chain. And across the west coast, a north and westerly wind will be predominant there from St. Lawrence Island at 20 knots to areas just west of Hooper Bay at 35 knots with a 6-foot sea along the YK coast. Northwesterlies around the Kuskokwim Bay at 25 knots, and westerly winds coming into the Pribilofs at 25 knots with a 7-foot sea. That lays down a little bit more on Friday at 10 knots. Still coming in from the north and west. Southerlies, though, pick up across St. Lawrence Island at with 6-foot seas, and we'll keep northwesterlies there in Kuskokwim Bay at 25 knots with a 6-foot sea to wrap up the week. And across the Arctic coast, northwesterlies coming into Barrow all the way down toward Cape Lisburn at 20 knots or so, 15 knots a little bit further north, 20 knots on a northwesterly flow coming into Kotzebue Sound with a 5-foot sea, and westerlies from Prudhoe Bay to Dead Horse and Kaktovik at 15 to 20 knots with a 3-foot sea there. That picks up a little bit more from the north and west as we get into Friday, as colder air is still dropping southward into the Brooks Range. We'll see more of a southerly flow come up through Kotzebue Sound and off of Cape Lisburn from the south and southeast with 2 to 3 foot seas there and 3-foot seas across the Beaufort Sea coast. Recapping tonight's weather, colder air is dropping south toward the Brooks Range, and with it comes a better chance for rain for the interior and south and western Alaska, with periods of snow across some of the higher elevations there of the Brooks Range and offshore of Barrow. Otherwise, we're looking at rain across the northern parts of the Gulf, showers across northern and western sections of southeast and the Alaska Peninsula with high pressure setting up across the Bering and staying put pretty much through the end of the week. Look for rain to mix with snow across parts of the Brooks Range tomorrow, and showers will continue across the Arctic coast and coastal plain with rain setting in across south central and southeastern Alaska heading into Friday. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.